Good afternoon. I am very, very aware that I stand between you and pizza, so mine is only, it's just under 20 minutes. So my name's Glenn Dunkerton. I'm with Regional Men's Health. Regional Men's Health, we're based in Northern, but we service the entire state. We sort of pride ourselves on going where the blokes are. We are unashamedly all about men's health, but in the same breath we acknowledge the fact that 80% of the calls we get are concerned wives, girlfriends or mums worried about the blokes in their lives. So, but what we are about is empowering communities, so that's why when we go out we're talking to men's sheds or we're talking to community groups, because we're all about a bottoms-up approach, community-driven change, and for blokes to take a bit of responsibility around their health. We do our warrior education sessions where we might go out to a men's shed and do a talk on prostate cancer, or we might go to a footy club and do a talk on young blokes and risk-taking, or after particular events and we might do some talks on distress and why mental health and wellbeing matters. We also do the Fast Track Pit Stop, which is around looking after our health. It's a bit of a health engagement tool that you might have seen us do at things like the Wage and Woolarama and Darren Field Days. And we do a bit of advocacy, and that's when we act as a referral pathway to try and line people up with the best service. So we might be putting you in touch with Dean at Rural West or with Roger at Rural Aid, or lining people up with a GP to get a mental health care plan. So we act as that sort of referral pathway to help people get the service that they need. We do get around, there's about 400 or so gigs in a year. It leaned off a little bit in COVID, but it's coming back. The big thing that we need to realise is while there's a massive concentration on profit, performance, product, the big P that's left out all the time is people. That's our most precious resource. And you can take what you want from that photo, whether it's a bloke out at work with his best mate or if it is the black dog following you around. That's where we're sort of looking today, wellbeing in challenging times. And at the moment it is a bit of a challenging time. So what's our mental health? It's about being able to balance all those competing demands in our life, being able to maintain our relationships even when we're coping with some distress. All those, like I said, all those competing demands in our life, be it with the demands of relationships, the kids, the business, and all the things all piling on top of one another. We're also going to look at what situational distress is. We're going to look at checking our shockies, which there's a sheet on most of the chairs there, and managing distress in our life. So in terms of what the stressors for rural and regional people are, there's those seasonal factors which we're in the middle of now: droughts, floods, fires, access to services, kids' education, financial pressure, work-life balance, and all the sort of stuff that perhaps we don't talk about. So what is distress? It's important to realise that stress is actually important. Stress is normal. It's what helps us get out of bed in the morning. It's what saved us from the saber-toothed tiger when we're living in the cave. But as life goes on, it's very easy for stress to become sort of maladapted and fire off a little bit too easy. So excessive stress can lead to distress. Distress leads to dysfunction. Moving out of our comfort zone can cause distress, and things that we can't control might be distresses, and that's things like the weather, I suppose. So it's important that we work on the stressors that we can manage rather than railing against stuff that we can't, and it's really important that we keep those affected informed, be that your family, your partner, or as Dean was saying, remaining in contact with the bank. All right, it's important that we keep those people that are affected informed. So in terms of situational distress, and Dean talked a little bit about it, what's really important with situational distress is we quite often fail to sort of realise that there's a lot of stuff that's going on in our life that that can help contribute to mental illness, and it starts from situations that are left unresolved. And if they're left unattended, they can be really debilitating. And like I said before, be that relationships, be that the uncertainty of the weather, be that your physical health, like we were saying, like we've been talking about all day today, the pressures of where we live and work. So in terms of sort of illustrating situational distress, it'd be fantastic if we constantly stayed in the green and operated in the green, but that doesn't represent a real year, doesn't represent a real week, sometimes it doesn't represent a real day, okay? Quite often we'll bounce into situational distress and we'll be challenged. And it's important to realise that bouncing into situational distress and back into the green is a totally normal way to be. It is okay to be upset when bad things happen. Sometimes we hold too high a standard for ourselves in that we feel like somehow we've failed if we're upset about something. What we need to realise is, in terms of a mental illness, there's only a couple of ways we can arrive at that. One is we're genetically predisposed to have that, but also we can arrive at a mental illness diagnosis by sitting in situational distress for prolonged periods of time. And that's because we're not talking to someone and we're not able to find out, we're not able to normalise the problem. So we know what the issues are. We don't want to show ourselves as the only one with the problem. The next slide kind of illustrates that in terms of how blokes quite often deal with stuff. We're very good at masking. So when you're in deep shit, try and say nothing and try and look like you know what you're doing, like the fox in there, okay? And that quite often the response that blokes will go to. And unfortunately, by maintaining that stiff upper lip or not reaching out and saying I'm having a struggle, one, it compounds the problem, but two, it isolates you from any sources of assistance, because quite often people aren't aware. So it removes that safety net or that social network that's around you. So there are some things that exacerbate the problem. So there's some risk factors, so loneliness and isolation, but when you add uncertainty into the mix, it sort of has a bit of a multiplier effect. So one of the biggest impactors on people's mental health and well-being is that uncertainty, and the weather is one of those. So I mentioned before the shock absorber sheet. That's sitting there. It's an indicator of stress in our life, and it's a useful little activity that I'd encourage you to do. I'm not assessing it. I'm an ex-school teacher, and whenever I put a pen and a piece of paper out, people go, "Oh God, he's going to test me on something." I'm not. It's for you to take away and have a look at. It's useful as a check for those around you that you love and you're worried about. But it's also really useful as a self-check for you. The way that you use it is apply it to your age and stage in life, because the first thing I did when I joined Regional Men's Health was I got Dad to do it, and he said, "Shit, I don't know how I'm going to go with this. Number one, I'm a 5, I'm slowed down and low in energy." I said, "Dad, you're 86, you're allowed to be." All right? The second thing is base it over a fortnight, because if we base it over a fortnight, it takes out the fact that maybe you staked a tyre and got multi-novaed on the way here and you've had a terrible day, so that's going to skew your results. So base it over a fortnight. But the things that come up in there, they are little indicators of stress, and you're asked to rate where you think you fit there, with a 1 for almost never and a 5 for most of the time. And whilst there's some things that we need to keep an eye on, whether we're not availing ourselves of the social opportunities that we were only a few weeks ago, so we're withdrawn, or we're having unexplained temper outbursts, we might be able to explain them through, or we might be able to reconcile them through what's going on at the time, but it's important we go through it. But there's some ones down the bottom that I think that are the real alarm bells ringing and we really need to act on, and that is, if we're unable to get rid of bad thoughts or ideas, particularly around self-harm, it's it's not rare for people to have that idea, but if that idea is being harboured and hung on to, while we're still conscious and cognizant enough of the fact that we're having those thoughts and we don't want to be having those thoughts, that's really when we need to talk to someone. So it's really important. But I encourage you to take that home. It's a useful little test for markers of, and the instructions are on it. Likewise, on the back, there's actually a heap of really useful links and resources for people who are having a bit of a struggle. So what can we do to manage our distress? We can identify our mates. Our mates, we talk about mates being in three categories: peers, partners or mentors. Peers are those with a similar age and life experience to us. Our partners are those intimate relationships that give our life that bit of certainty and structure sometimes, most of the time. And mentors are those older, wiser people that we lean on for a bit of lived experience and a bit of wisdom. And it's really important because the ladies tend to maintain all three of those categories to a greater extent over their lifetime, whereas blokes tend to prune, not because we're horrible, but we just tend to prune those friendship groups as we move from school into adulthood, as we move town, as we change job, and as relationships fall over. Sometimes team he doesn't talk to team she anymore, so therefore then that friendship group's removed, and all of those things add to a much smaller network and support group when we find ourselves in a bit of trouble. So it's important that we nurture all three of those categories. Healthy habits about programming time out from work and normalising the problem, which involves talking to others and realising that perhaps you're not the only person in that situation. Being prepared to talk about the stuff that causes pain, reducing alcohol consumption, maintaining social opportunities, take a holiday when we can, and being willing to talk to appropriate people. Soldiering through on your own doesn't make you any braver. What it does is it removes the one of the crutches on which you could lean to actually help you get through. So the reason we focus on community, our model of primary care, is the fact that it's a little bit like, community is the first people that are there. We're a bit like first aid. We're not the paramedic. It's about the person that's first on the scene being able to offer that little bit of assistance and to look out for the people around us. Because as much as in regional, remote and rural WA, we'd like to have a specialist on every corner, and we should avail ourselves of those whenever we have the opportunity. But what we do have on every corner is the members of our community, our family, and our workmates. And they're the ones uniquely positioned to see any small changes in us. And it's important that we look after ourselves as a primary responsibility too. A little bit, there's aircraft accidents topical and in the news at the moment, but the reason they tell you to put the oxygen on yourself before you put it on your kids when you're given the flight instructions on a plane, that's because we need to look after ourselves. We need to be functional to look after the other people in our life that we care about. So it starts with a conversation if we're looking out for those around us that we're worried about. So how they're feeling, what's bothering you, how long have you felt this way. Try and steer away from one-word answers or where you can be sort of stonewalled. What's that creating for you? What can I do to help? But it's important because quite often blokes are put off by the fact that they feel like they can't ask the question because they don't have the answer. They think, oh, I don't know the answer, so I won't ask the question. It's not about that. It's about being empathetic, listening, and being there. Don't pretend to be an expert. Suggest some further help. Follow up on how they're going. And if they don't want help, one of our workarounds, sort of cross your fingers, Barleys, if you're worried about someone and you don't think they're going to reach out and ask for help, what you can say to them is, listen, we're worried about you. We don't think you're going to ask for help. Are you okay if we give your name to Regional Men's Health and they give you a call? And that's quite often our workaround for someone who we think isn't going to make the call. Because we can't cold call someone out of the blue, but that's our cross your fingers, Barleys. We worked around that. All right? So it's really important to continue to support and encourage them. People take time, and that checking in on them later on is invaluable. So in the terms of this seasonal context, you're flat out dealing with the here and now. Understandably, it's a really stressful period. Remember that before you can look out for others, you need to look out for yourself. That's why I was talking about the oxygen mask in the plane. You need to put it on yourself, get yourself right, so that you can then deal with others and look after everyone else. You are responsible for your health and well-being, not your doctor, not your wife, not your partner, and not your workplace. It is about you looking after yourself, so make sure that you do. Keep a positive personal attitude, talk to whoever needs to be informed, look for realistic solutions, don't panic or overreact, consider all your options, consider it as a challenge more than a problem, and hook up with any assistance that's being offered. Sometimes, though, bureaucracy has its own little foibles and things you need to work through, but I encourage you to keep on trying. So there's some state and national campaigns. Dean touched on some of the stuff available there. There's some flyers on the desk over here as well that we've put out, and whether that's local GPs, local support services, there's a whole heap. And like I said, Rural Aid and Rural West both have reps here, Roger and Dean. So, and they're the people that we sort of link in with if we're trying to put people in touch. And I just want to thank you all for listening to us. We do have a podcast if you're at all interested, but all the best for the coming season. Thank you very much.